first became aware of Dr. Wylie when I was part of a webinar organised by the Melbourne-based Climate and Health Alliance. And I contacted Kate soon after, and she almost immediately said yes, she'd join us. There was some complications about the fact that she has to work on certain Saturdays of the month. But anyway, we worked that out. Kate's, as a GP, Kate's been obviously active in public health and community health and that sort of stuff. And she now tries to help people as best she can, when she can, about climate change, the impact it will have on their health. So we'll hear from Kate for a few minutes, and Jeff is really keen to look at her overheads and stuff, so we'll see those. So thanks for joining us, Kate. I really appreciate that.
Oh, you're so welcome, Robert. It's my pleasure to be here.
I'll just click the share screen thing. Oh, look at that.
Yeah, I think you need to give me, allow me to do it. So yeah, either make me co-host or make it so participants can share their screen.
I think I've done that. It should work.
No, it says host disabled participants.
Hang on. Try that.
Try that. Love it.
Oh, good.
Try that. Okay, so can everybody see that?
Yep, I can.
Yeah, we're all good?
Yep.
Okay, so yeah, so, you know, and, you know, if people want to, if you have questions as we go and you want to interrupt or whatever, you know, we're a small group, so we can be a bit more chatty. But yeah, basically, I talk a lot about climate change and human health, and I'm a GP. I am on Kaurna land. So I just like to acknowledge traditional owners of the lands across Australia and pay my respects to First Nations people and to elders past, present and emerging from all across our beautiful country. Hello to a group in Ghana is Namani. So Namani to you all. And just to give you a bit of an idea of who I am and what I do, I chair the RACGP's Climate and Environmental Medicine Specific Interest Group. I'm on the board of Doctors for the Environment Australia, and I facilitate our after hours webinar series, which has got some good videos. I've written my own website called Climate Medicine. These are some stickers that I've had made up. And this is me talking at a climate rally last year in Adelaide. And this is a picture of my dogs. This is Chloe. Oh, this is Chloe, poor Chloe. And this is Ella. And I always put my dogs in because, you know, we focus on the human impacts of climate change, but what we're doing to our planet, we're doing to every living thing on our planet, every plant, every animal, every fungus. You know, and sometimes we can get a little bit cynical about humanity and think, you know, maybe we don't deserve saving, but let's remember that when you're having those cynical moments, let's save it for our pets. Here's another picture of Ella. She's beautiful, right? How can you not want to look after a beautiful creature like her? So as a doctor, what I've done is I've applied a medical model to climate change. So I look at climate change the same way as I look at any other medical condition, you know, like what causes it, how does it affect us, and how do we treat it? You know, so let's look at climate change like we'd look at any other life-threatening medical condition. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about causes, and I'm going to show a high overview of the health effects, which there's heaps of them. So it'll be an overview. And then at the end, I've got an idea about like what I think we should do to treat it, like how we should act to save ourselves. I think the first thing that we always need to say is that science is settled. So, you know, last year, the IPCC, so the Intergovernmental Panel of Climate Change, handed down their latest report, and they said that it is unequivocal that human influence has warmed the atmosphere, ocean and land. Widespread and rapid changes in the atmosphere, ocean, cryosphere and biosphere have occurred. So, you know, unequivocal, that's science speak for dead set sure, 100% certain, no room for doubt. The IPCC was formed in 1988 after this man, oh, I said, where's my thing? After this man, James Hansen, presented to the US Senate in 1987. James Hansen was a NASA climate scientist, so, you know, pretty smart bloke. And, you know, all that time ago, so back in 1987, that was the same year that Kylie's Locomotion was #1 on the Australian charts. and Beverly Hills Cop 2 got Best Picture at the Oscars. So, you know, all that time ago, they was, you know, the scientists were singing out loud and clear what was going on. You know, what he basically said at that time was that when we burn fossil fuels, we release greenhouse gases, and this increases the greenhouse effect, which increases the temperature, causing more extreme heat and changing the climate. So when we burn coal and oil and gas, we release carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide, methane, and a whole slew of other gases. These gases rise, become incorporated in the gaseous layer that surrounds our planet that acts to keep heat in. The thicker, the denser this layer of gases, the more heat's reflected back onto the planet and the hotter it gets on the ground. And this has changed our climate. We know that the CO2 concentration is the highest it's been for at least 800,000 years. And you can see the massive uptick since 1950. May of this year, we're at, you know, we're basically at 420 parts per million CO2 in the atmosphere now. And you can see that methane and nitrous oxide are following the same kind of exponential growth curve, these massive upticks. When we look at where our emissions come from, the vast chunk comes from energy. The energy we use in industry, the energy we use in our transport, what we use in our buildings. Oh, wait a sec, back we go. Sort of the other sort of smaller things, and obviously agriculture, forestry and land use comes in there as well. But, you know, it's really about burning fossil fuels. That's the primary cause of the problem. And yeah, you know, we know the last 7 years are the hottest on record. We're currently at about 1.2 above the pre-industrial baseline. And, you know, we're looking at it just getting hotter as we go. I think it's really important to point out that when we're talking about an increase in temperature, we're talking about an increase in the average temperature. Because, you know, when you say 1 degree, 2 degree, you know, it kind of doesn't sound like much, right? If it's 26 or 27, I'm still walking my dogs. It's no great drama. But when you plot temperature on a bell curve, you kind of really start to see why it matters. So looking at Australian numbers here. So back in 1960 to 1991, the average temperature in Australia was 21.8 degrees. And some days it was really cold. And some days it was really hot. But fundamentally, the average in Australia was 21.8 degrees. In 2019, the average temperature in Australia was 23.3 degrees, so 1.5 degrees higher. That means that whole curve shifts to the right. And yeah, you still have cold days. And yeah, you have a lot of really nice days. It's a very nice day in Adelaide today. But you have more hot days and more extremely hot days. And that has changed our climate. When we look at it on the ground, what are we seeing? We're seeing the heat waves. We're seeing the droughts. We're seeing fires, smoke, floods. I mean, it's been pretty full on in Australia this past few months, hasn't it, with the flooding? Extreme weather events, even in Canberra, they know in Canberra. Rising sea levels and coral bleaching because of increased acidity in our oceans, and all across the planet, the ice is melting. And that brings me to my point number 2, is that we must act now. You know, the hotter it gets, the worse things are. We're currently at 1.2. When the Paris Agreement was signed, it was to limit global warming to less than 2 degrees and as close to 1.5 as possible. And that was in 2015, they did that. And at that time, the IPCC was commissioned to have a look at what does 1.5 and 2 degrees mean? Like, does it really matter? And they handed down their report in 2018 and said, oh, yes, it really matters. If we want a livable planet, we need to limit to 1.5. And for us to have a 50% chance of achieving that, so 1 in 2, a toss of a coin, we need to halve global emissions by 2030 and reach 0 by 2050. And, you know, last year they basically said, unless there's rapid, immediate, large-scale reductions in gases, limiting to 1.5 will be beyond reach. And this year they've basically said we've got the next 3 years for emissions to peak, or the 1.5 window is lost. We've lost. So it's, you know, a bright little, happy little morning talk. I can see why people don't come. Anyway, and the real reason why it's the most scary thing is this concept of tipping points. So these are these points of no return where we basically change the state of how our planet works, you know, and once the point is tipped, we can't get it back. We don't get to reverse it. We don't know exactly when they're going to occur, but we can see the tipping points happening around us. You know, we can see the droughts in the Amazon rainforest. Currently, the Amazon emits more CO2 than it absorbs. We're seeing loss of sea ice. We're seeing slow changes in the Atlantic circulation, changes in the Gulf Stream, coral reefs dying all across the planet. And yeah, fundamentally, the ice is melting. And when we look at where we're heading, you can see we're basically looking at about 3 degrees of global warming by the end of this century. And if we want to sort of get this 1.5 degree or the 2 degree pathway, we have to act now. We have to get ourselves sorted this decade and rapidly decarbonize our world. So yeah, we've got to get onto it. And the reason why we need to is because it affects our health. It's a health emergency. You know, this is coming, you know, we're in trouble, right? Climate change is being called the biggest global health threat of the 21st century. The World Health Organization thinks that between 2030 and 2050, it'll cause an extra 250,000 deaths per year from malnutrition, malaria, diarrhea, and heat stress. But this number doesn't include the deaths from pollution, the deaths from smoke inhalation, all the other infections, mental illness, extreme weather events, migration, and conflict, all of which carry their own significant morbidity and mortality. You know, and the world, you know, like the medical community across the world really is getting this. We do recognise it. In Australia, climate health emergency declarations have been made by the AMA, Doctors for the Environment, the GPs, which I'm a member of, the rural and remote medicine doctors. So every doctor that comes, you know, in your region would be a member of one of these 2 groups. There's all these global bodies that are caring about climate and health, so the Global Climate and Health Alliance and all of these others. Last year, ahead of COP26, more than 200 medical journals across the world simultaneously published an editorial, which is like an unprecedented thing. And they basically were calling for urgent action to keep average global temperature increases below 1.5 to halt the destruction of nature and protect health. You know, at the COP last year, there was a parallel climate and health conference, and that was the first time health had kind of been included at the COPs. So just in case people don't know, COP stands for Conference of the Parties, and it's where all the countries that signed on to the Paris Agreement get together, have a bit of a meeting and decide whether we're, you know, achieving their aims or not, which is the bigger problem. So yes, for the first time health's been included. It'll be included again in Egypt, we hope, this year. And if Australia and the Pacific get their bid for 2023, it's definitely going to be there. And this is probably the biggest kind of most sort of longest slide that I've got, and it looks at an overview of the health effects of climate. So if we start here, you can see obviously there's extreme heat. Heat waves are Australia's most deadly natural disaster. When it's, you know, heat's really bad for humans. On hot days, we see people dying of heat stroke. We also see increased risk of heart attacks and strokes. You see a lot of mental illness in heat. And then there's the severe weather. So obviously with storms, you see injuries and fatalities, but severe weather also includes fires and other extreme weather events. Climate means impact on our food and water supply. So climate has joined war and poverty as one of the 3 great causes of food insecurity across the planet. It impacts on our water. We can, you know, you're where you are, you're an irrigating community, aren't you? You know, like you're on the Goulburn River. And so, you know, everybody where you are, I'm sure you all understand about water. And so, you know, when there's a drought, there's not enough water, the food, you know, the crops fail. When there's floods, you know, crops fail too because they get flooded out, but also you get those increased infectious diseases. And I don't know if anyone near you had Japanese encephalitis, but there was that, you know, outbreak earlier, a few months ago, as far south as, you know, Victoria, which is new. So yeah, we're getting globally climate floodings associated with outbreaks of cholera, and Campylobacter and leptospirosis and cryptosporidiosis and all these big disease, big names, but basically they're bacterial diarrheal infections that can kill you. Also with, rivers, we're getting problems with algal blooms due to loss of oxygen in rivers. We're seeing air pollution and increased allergens. So air pollution, not only does burning coal, oil and gas increase greenhouse gases and cause a greenhouse effect, coal, oil and gas also releases, lots of yuck and muck, all that yuck pollution. And, this big study came out last year called the Geochem study, and it showed that 1 in 5 deaths per year around the planet is due to pollution. So 1 in 5, that's more than smoking. It's a massive number, isn't it? And most people don't believe it when they first hear it. It's because it's just, a bit of a bomb goes off. So, I think we should stop burning fossil fuels. How about we stop? It's killing us. Anyway, obviously with infectious diseases, we're seeing lots of changes in the vector ecologies. So things like malaria, dengue, all of those others you can read on the screen. Basically, we're seeing increased distribution of the diseases, so more places being affected and a longer season of infectivity. And so, massive global problems with that. Climate change is a social justice issue. Certainly, the people from disadvantaged communities are affected more than people who are more advantaged. Basically, rich people can buy themselves out of trouble. And so, social justice is a massive problem. And then with environmental degradation, we're seeing forced migration and civil conflict. And, we're in a world of diminishing resources, and, there's been a lot of work that predicts a lot of wars around climate and water and resources. And, Ukraine that's what I think they're doing anyway. All right. But just to summarize, the big 6 for us in Australia, where's my heat, fires, smoke, food and water insecurity, infectious diseases, and of course, mental illness. And, I don't think you can look this problem in the eye without being psychologically affected. I know I am. I know lots of people around me are too. And, when you look at young people, they've got lots of there's massive eco-anxiety in young people, but anybody who, sees what's happening, it's scary. So
just on that point, Kate.
This is a good time to pause.
The point of mental health and so forth, and we all suffer from it to some degree, right? Not a problem. But what we've got is a situation where with the climate, there's an element of people, a proportion of people that it's so stressful for them, they've actually given it away. They can't actually embrace it anymore. It's too difficult. You're a rare bod because you're right up the top end and you're still punching away. And I'd like to think everyone here on this screen is too. We're still having a go every day. We're trying to come up with a new idea yesterday.
So I hear where you're coming from, Terry. It's like it's so overwhelming and scary that I can understand why people give up, because you think, well, what's the point? I may as well just go to the pub. But if we don't try, we fail.
That's right. But it just gets harder to embrace those. It's hard to embrace. We'll call them the average Joe. And I'm one of them, to do something. But if a fair percentage of them are, in a sense, not embracing it, and therefore they're not capable of making that change, right? Irrespective if they have the resources to do it, they're just confused. I find this is a bit of a problem here. I'd like your views on that.
I think I hear where you're coming from, absolutely. And this is why we need leadership, and we need the media to do their bit too. Like we need to shift what's normal. For a long time, we've the last election was called the climate election. For the first time in ages, there was this sense that our country might be kind of going in the right direction. But, before that, we've had decades of climate wars where, there's all this, the culture of denialism, and, we've not been led properly. And if we could be, I think the more our leaders do the right thing, the more it encourages people to see that it's happening, the more they want to get on board. And when it comes to the health professions, this is where it's why we need to step up. And one of the reasons why I have, Terry, because I look around and go, well, what are we going to do? Just sit back and watch the world burn? And so if, health professions, all the industries, all of us, you look at Farmers for Climate Action, go them. All of us having a crack. But I can understand why it's scary.
Yeah, well, I think just before, I won't take anything, but we had, how long ago did we have, tried to embrace this health issue, Rob? It's what, 7 or 8 years ago now?
Oh, yeah, probably, Terry. I reckon
probably
so.
More. Yeah, and the health industry, and we had speakers up at GV Health and all that, sort of in their auditorium and all that. But it was pretty hard to embrace them at that point.
I think we had about 20 people when we were at GV Health. Out
of bloody 2,400 or something. And I know things have changed a bit, but they're like, you take them now with COVID for the last 2 years, they're just flat strapped trying to stay alive like you are, with your head above water.
Well, this is the problem, isn't it? And COVID, what annoys me is that we don't talk about COVID more as a disease from the way we're trashing our planet. All of those diseases, the zoonotic diseases, diseases that started off in animals and then spread to humans, usually are due to land use change. And so as we encroach on natural systems, we get close to some animal that normally carries the disease, it mutates and jumps to humans, and away it goes. And why COVID wasn't used as a narrative for that vexes me a lot. But regarding getting doctors on board, certainly that is the my basic thing, Terry, and we're trying really hard. And I think the RACGP, certainly they declared an emergency at the end of 2019. I've just been involved with a briefing paper where our president spoke to Chris Bowen about the need for mitigation to protect human health. So there is work there, but I take your point that lots of doctors on the ground aren't really aware of this, aren't kind of taking it on. And
I think the media, like in anything, you just you understand that the transfer of disease from animals to, you understand the complexities of the ecosystem and all that, but the press don't understand it. And they're not game to write anything because they don't know what they're talking about. Or that's a problem.
Well, it's not a catch. It's too hard to explain. Like anything that requires 1, 2, 3, 4 steps to explain, you can't write it in a headline. And and the rise of misinformation is also a massive problem, isn't it? Like all the stuff with COVID, far out. Anyway.
Kate, how do we raise this issue with our doctors? Like my personal doctor, how do I raise that issue with them?
Just ask them.
Yeah.
So, like you could say to them, Kate Wylie came and spoke to us and she spoke about climate and what are you guys doing? Say, do you worry about the health effects of climate change? Or, what do you see as the health of, how do you think climate change is affecting me and my health? That'd be a good question.
Okay, I'll do that.
And then point them to the resources that are linked in the chat.
I'll do that.
I just read an article in The Age about Ryan, the doctor in the Teal, new member.
Monique Ryan.
Yeah.
She's a doctor.
Absolutely. She's
very
a
interesting
pediatric
story. Yeah, very interesting story.
Yeah, she's amazing, isn't she?
Yeah, she is.
Yeah, and Sophie Scamps, who's one of the other Teal independents, she's a GP.
Is she?
Yeah. So I suppose we've got, like you feel like you're just pushing the boulder up the hill every day, don't you? And and down it rolls overnight. And but I still think you have to keep pushing, and I do think there's change. And the problem is whether we change quickly enough. I think now we're at a point where it's about pace.
Yep.
Do you want to press on with your presentation, Kate?
Yeah, sure. I just wanted, like, I always like to show this clip from NASA. It's 30 seconds, there's no sound, but it shows the global temperature anomaly from 1880 to the present day. Yeah. It's pretty confronting, isn't it?
I reckon, yeah.
It's also confronting, Kate, if you could, over the top of that, just see how the planets lit up at night. If you could actually do that from 1900 was virtually in darkness. But as you come across now, the whole at night the planets lit up, and that's directly through energy.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Coal.
All right. Well, should we talk about solutions?
Yeah.
Great idea.
Yeah. So look, obviously, we need policy change, and we need corporate responsibility. Like, we need the big businesses to, take responsibility. But I also think there's a place for individual action, because all of us need to be involved. And the more people that are climate active, we influence the people around us. So we need a movement that incorporates those three, I think. I think this is aside from that I give to medical people, but basically, all of us, we have an ethical responsibility to do something. We're facing an extant threat, and to not do something about it when you got to try, try or die trying, right? So yeah, fundamentally, I think it's in our hands. The first thing I think we all need to do is acknowledge the problem. We need to own it. We need to say that this is happening. And, we need to do this individually and collectively. These are not future problems, they're current problems. The longer we put it off, the worse things are, and the greater the risk for our health. And yeah, we're risking our own extinction. And I think that's really what the Climate Emergency Declaration movement is all about. Saying that, owning that it's an emergency, so that therefore we then put that emergency at the centre of our action. I'm very lucky to be living in South Australia, where I haven't updated this slide, but the upper house declared a climate emergency in September 2019, and the lower house now has declared earlier this year. And the reason why they did that was because there was this old law that if you had 10,000 handwritten signatures on a petition, so that they would put a motion to Parliament from the floor. And yeah, so this group of people in South Australia collected 10,000 hand signatures. You weren't allowed to use a computer, it had to be with a pen. And, got it, and now we've got a climate emergency declaration. So I think that's a little bit of a positive story about, the power of human action. And then the second thing we do, we have to stop making it worse. We have to stop burning fossil fuels, and we don't really need them as much as we do. So I went to a great talk by the Australian Institute where it said that with our current knowledge, our current technology, we could reduce our energy emissions by 80% in 10 years. We could do it if we wanted to. So there are some things that are harder, and like I know that steel as an industry development is tricky, but there's a lot that we can do. And then, let's solve those other ones later. Let's do what we can now. This is Doctors for the Environment stuff. I won't read this out, but basically it's saying these are our DEA's aims around adopting robust targets and cleaning up the health industry, basically. And we know that all climate solutions are a win for climate, and they're a win for our economy and a win for our health. So, we know that, new renewables are cheaper. We know that, insulating your building saves you energy money, so much that we could do is about efficiency and, makes good for our pocket, basically. we certainly need to be protecting our biodiversity. We're living in a extinction event, and what can I say about that? I mean, you know, Australia, we've got this unique biodiversity that's under threat, and that's, I think, I think that's just so tragic, actually. You know, we look at the health of the Murray-Darling Basin and what's going on there and think, how can this happen on my watch? How can we just let it go past us? And, you know, I'm speaking to the converted, I know.
Just on that point,
yeah, sure.
Our local environment group had a meeting yesterday, actually. It's about ecosystem services, and I've been banging on this for quite a while, and the importance of it. And I think this is the big issue actually coming. And even now, with you might be aware that we've got the varroa mite in amongst the bees in New South Wales, which is then we're not there. I think it's still current that they can't bring their bees to Victoria for pollination of the enormous almond crop that we have here. And that almond crop, of course, is being developed without, well, it's caused a whole lot of changes in the way in which we provide water down the Murray. So really, they've just gone ahead and developed this monoculture with the view that they'll just bring in the bloody, you know, the bees, right? The jobs, right?
Yeah.
And it's tragic, you know, that could have been developed in conjunction with, you know, extensive sort of environment around it to provide some or nearly all those ecosystem services that were necessary there. So I think the big one,
Terry.
Oh, it's just not only is a mistake by water, you know, allowing the bloody development to go ahead, because like almonds, like if just as an aside, that you irrigate around here, you use about 10 megs a hectare to actually irrigate. When it's dry, you got to water almonds straight away as soon as it so they can use nearly up to 30 megalitres per hectare, right? So they're huge water users in dry conditions. And now you couple this with the bees and the pollination services, it's just dreadful. And I think ecosystem services in its whole thing is the next big discussion ahead. We've judged around biodiversity. We couldn't articulate ecosystem services in the Murray-Darling Basin argument. You know, but they're so important. Like even we've got a local people, I know I'm banging on a bit, but one bloke wrote 2 months ago that when it rained, you know, back 50 years ago, if you went across the causeway between Maroopin and Shepparton, you'd run over, you know, 1,000 frogs, right? Yeah. Now there's not one. Yesterday, someone said, oh, when I had my coffee meeting, I remember when we went back 30 years, you went out for a drive at night, you had to get out and clean the windscreen. You know, there's that many bugs on it. The lights, you know, now
you don't get them anymore. You don't get the insects,
and it's just gradual.
Yeah, and
that's notice it.
And you know, it's that whole frog in the pot of boiling water, isn't it? Concept is that we don't see what's going on because we don't have a long enough memory to know what it was like before. Yeah, and
we're not reminded too.
I think what you're saying about the almond crop is really interesting, and that's where you know, proper education and awareness comes in, because, you know, why do we have this massive like almond milk? You know, like you go to the cafe and you get an almond latte because you're having less dairy because you're trying to, you know, reduce your impact on the planet. And what you're doing is you're you know, creating a whole heap of eco problem for you and your area, you know.
Yeah, well, Alfred, you had that. What's the case you said in Holland yesterday, Al?
Yeah, there's a new, the Q fever is coming up in Netherlands because everybody wants goat milk in their coffee. So there's huge, big goat dairies. And when you walk past those dairies, the Q fever comes out of the vents and people get Q fever from the goats. And that's a big problem apparently at the moment.
Wow, Q fever's nasty.
It is, yeah, and it's carried by carried by goats over there.
So
we got to change, don't we?
Yeah.
All right. And that's the thing, we've got to prepare. That's my next slide. Prepare for our change world. Oh, that worked out well. Nice segue. So, you know, we need to build resilience and you know, adaptation. And I don't know if you're aware of the work that Red Cross does about building climate-ready communities. It's really about acting locally and being community-minded so that, you know, when there's a disaster, as you know, we saw in all the floods, it's your people, it's your neighbours that help you the most, you know. And so that sense of us, you know, being aware as a community, having disaster management plans, you know, and the I've forgotten their names, the emergency services people with the ex-emergency services who were lobbying about fire safety, that kind of thing. Oh yeah, I've got emergency leaders for climate action, and having the Australian Bushfire Climate Plan. I mean, their work is stellar. I'm really happy to hear that they were spoken to by Chris Bowen and Albanese early after the elections. That's a plus. And embracing First Nations stewardship. So we know that a lot of caring for country stuff is really helpful for long-term, you know, ecosystem services, as you say. This table comes from the latest IPCC report, so where the scientists are also trying to incorporate First Nations knowledge in Australia on how to care for our land. And then, so I mean, a lot, that's sort of touched on big stuff, but I think the biggest problem, and you alluded to it earlier, Terry, is that concept of what can I do? You know, like, I'm just one little person on this big, scary planet. What can I do? And what I think is, you know, the first answer is just do something. You know, like, everything you do is something that's done, and it wouldn't be done if you didn't do it. So do something. You know, and when you do something, acknowledge it. Say, yeah, I did that. Good me. You know, like, it's at least it's something, right? And, you know, be part of the solution, not part of the problem. Go in the right direction. One person can do a lot if they choose to. So Greta Thunberg is one person. She's had a massive effect. Scott Morrison's one person. He had a big effect too, right? So, you know, together we can do, you know, one person can do things, but also collectively we're powerful. So I think, you know, in Australia, you know, COVID's kind of away now, but, you know, for a long time, we did really well with COVID because of the power of collective action. You know, and we changed overnight because of government leadership. You know, we know about masks, and we know about social distancing, and, you know, all of that stuff. So let's have a go. I've got a list of 10 things that I think everybody can do, which I will just go through, and that's kind of me for the talk. And you can consider this list as individuals and organisations. I wrote it about 3 years ago, and I'm working through it, right? You can't do everything overnight. But the first thing you can do is just learn for your climate. So look it up, right? You know, like, rather than just, you know, playing match 3 games or something. So there's Doctors for the Environment's website. NASA's information is fabulous. The Climate Council's information is fabulous. The Planetary Health Alliance is really great, especially for the concepts of planetary health. You know, we talk about climate, but there's a whole heap of other problems facing our planet. You know, we've touched on the concept of biodiversity, but there's also nitrogen and phosphorus pollution, plastics, you know, water, all of that. So number 1, look it up. Number 2 is talk for your planet. So talking to each other helps us learn. It helps us create positive change. It unites us in our shared humanity, and we don't need to be shy about it. Most of us are worried. So this stuff from the Australian Institute, you know, 80% of Australians think we're already experiencing the impacts of climate change. You know, we all think, you know, it's going to cause more bushfires, and we should phase out coal, and we like solar. And so, you know, most Australians actually are worried about climate, but it's like this elephant in the room. We're not talking about it. So I don't think we should be shy. I think we should get in there and talk about it. Number 3 is eating for your planet. So we know that agriculture is a chunk of emissions and obviously impacts on energy. The Eat Lancet diet was is also called the Planetary Health Diet. And it was basically formulated to allow us to feed our current population with our current agricultural land worldwide. And pretty much it's a really plant-rich diet. It's not a plant-only diet, but it's plant-rich. Talks about eating locally sourced in-season produce, going organic because of the nitrogen and phosphorus waste, and not to waste food. Yes, Jeff.
What's the 3rd item on that bar chart?
This one is cheese.
Wow.
Wow. So yeah, so this, I mean, I know that no one can ever read all the fine print on this, but it's, you know, you'd have to have better eyes than me. But it's greenhouse gas emissions per kilo of food product in equivalence of carbon dioxide. And the line across the top is beef. And this is lamb, and this is cheese.
Cheese is third. Oh,
Yeah, cheese is third.
Can you just go down that list? What are the other ones below that?
Yeah, okay, so this is the dairy herd. So there's sort of a bit of a numbers accounting, see, number crunch going on there. This is chocolate. This is coffee. I know, prawns, palm oil, pig, poultry, olive oil, fish, eggs, rice, wild caught fish, milk, cane sugar, ground nuts, wheat and rye, tomatoes, corn, cassava, soy milk, peas, bananas, roots, apples, citrus, and nuts. And when you look at like the different colours, the this sort of, that's land use change, farms, feeding, processing, transport, retail, and packaging. This is a global bit of data. And so, you know, like there's local changes. And, you know, like the thing about nuts, it's like, you know, the story you're telling before, Terry, about the almonds, you know, like, whoa, so nothing's in isolation, is it? I mean, fundamentally, we need to be more self-reliant, don't we? You know, like,
Kate, can you just explain why nuts go on both sides, left and right?
Because you are planting a tree, and so trees absorb CO2 and, you know, sequester carbon into the soil.
Okay. The thing I find fascinating with that chart is how low down in terms of that carbon footprint chicken poultry is.
Yeah.
And
so I mean, the fundamental, one of the big things for beef and lamb is because they burp out methane.
Yeah.
And chickens don't. So yeah, you can feel less guilty about chicken.
Yeah, but you got a problem with how they're bloody grown.
I know, right? Yeah, I know, it's hard. There's no easy answers.
And the soya beans, all these soya beans are consumed by the beef cattle.
Yeah.
So there is a link there.
Yeah, and so like land use change is a massive problem, isn't it? You know, like when you deforest to grow crops to feed cows. Yeah, and like there's a chart on this about water, and you know, we know that cattle is really water intensive.
Yeah,
well. But then again, so is, you know, like soft drinks and all sorts of things.
Yeah, I think the water consumption with beef is something like 50 times more than chicken, I think. Yeah, the water consumption, yeah, it's huge. It's a big concern.
Well, even the conversion of protein, beef and lamb is so inefficient compared to poultry, compared to fish.
Yeah.
But one of the problems with the wild catch fish, it's unsustainable.
Well, that's right. You know, like the state of the oceans is so scary, isn't it?
Yeah. But for me, the standout with that is the red meat and where that sits on that graph.
Yeah, absolutely.
The challenge we have is, you know, the cornerstone of agricultural production here is dominated with dairy, but then you've got beef and lamb. And from a political point of view, the challenges of navigating the last decade in this space, talking about climate change, fundamentally challenged the thinking of mainstream agriculture. And climate change was seen as a political threat. And it's only in very recent time has it become safer for people within the rural setting to speak about climate change. Those percentages you had on your earlier screen, I would suggest they don't reflect what is said publicly, and it's still not a safe space for the majority of people in rural Victoria to speak openly about the need to address climate change. I still don't think we've made that pivotal change.
Yeah, it's you know, like, you know, I live in Adelaide, so I don't really, you know, have that same experience, and you know, certainly it can be pretty intimidating for me sometimes as well. But yeah, I agree that it must be a, you know, like there's different culture and different politics at play, isn't there?
Yeah.
And many of us are involved in public forums and speaking on climate change. And the way I describe the transition is 15 years ago, they threw stones. Today, they throw pebbles. But they're still throwing, and they still know where we live. So it's still a challenging conversation to have.
Yeah. And, you know, it's like, and you have to, it's that concept of just transition, isn't it? It's like, okay, so you can't have beef, and then but you're a dairy farmer. You know, that's your livelihood. And so we have to be able to provide answers for people so that we protect them, because it's not fair either, you know, and you can understand why it's upsetting. You know, you've got a whole life that you've put into creating this, you know, your world, your livelihood, your, you know, and then, you know, someone like me comes along with a graph.
Yeah. Well,
I'm from the government. I'm here to help. Yeah, that's right.
Well, the hostility around the Murray-Darling Basin Plan, there's been significant transitions in the last 1-2 decades in terms of water use in this region, and the transition has been painful. Unfairly, a lot of people attribute the transition to the Murray-Darling Basin Plan, and there were many other factors, and fundamental to sustainability is the irrigation system as it was designed and been operated 30 years ago was clearly unsustainable from a resource management point of view. And what needed to be done was less water needed to be applied. And that's exactly what's happened just by virtue of many processes. And today, from a physical point of view, the irrigation system is so much closer being sustainable. But from an economic point of view, it's on a brink of collapse. Because the sector, as in Gold Murray Water, is not able to cover its operating costs because they don't sell enough water.
Far out. So it's just set up as it's a wicked problem, isn't it? Like it's a whole big mess. I mean, my next point is water for your planet and the need to be water wise, and, you know, that town planning is involved with that. But, you know, the stuff that you're touching on, you know, there, Jeff, is, you know, outside of this individual action, because it's a much more complex and bigger problem than that. You know, I just encourage people not to buy bottled water, basically, you know, because if you're buying bottled water, you're just buying a bit of plastic, you know, that ends up in the whale's belly.
Plus, at one point, this is no joke, I went to a hotel in Melbourne, this is 10 years ago, and there's a little bottle of water there. It was 300 millilitres or something. It was $9 if you got it, you know, through the thing. It was 12,000 times dearer than what would be coming out of the tap that was right next to it.
Yeah,
right?
It's just such a symbol of the craziness of our world, right?
The last time I went to hospital, GV base, I'm in the recovery room, and there's about a dozen people, and they're giving people a couple of sandwiches and a coffee or drink of water, and then they handed out a survey. And as they were going around, there was this probably a 20-year-old woman, and she said, I'll fill out that survey because I want to complain because your water tastes disgusting and I want bottled water. And as the woman passed me with the survey, I said, I'll grab that, I'll fill it out because I'm going to complain because you provide bottled water.
Exactly.
And every step, when you've got your filters, you are tripping up on this every day, every day.
Yeah.
And therein lies the challenge.
Therein lies the challenge. I agree. All right. The next thing we can do is plant for our climate. And basically that's, you know, getting involved in tree planting schemes. It's gardening, you know, grow your own food. Now, I probably don't have to speak to you people about that. I'm sure lots of you, I'm imagining that you have some pretty good gardens. Am I being presumptuous?
$10 each, those sellers.
Yeah.
Lettuces.
Yeah, no, I have a garden that needs to be rested during the winter.
Well, this is it, you know, it's winter, what are we going to do? But certainly there's urban planning things that need to be, you know, talked about there. And, you know, that's the same thing with water, is town planning is an important thing, the concept of water-friendly cities. Number 6.
Kylie, to answer your question, I've got a domestic orchard. I've got about 15, 16 fruit trees, and I've been managing that for about 20 years. And I've come to the realization I eat too much fruit and it's detrimental to my health. And therein lies the challenge of eating the right food, and the notion that, and the distinction between fruit versus vegetables. Yeah,
veggies are great. Your fruits, well, when we're constipated, we eat fruit, don't we, to solve that problem?
Sure.
So, you know, All right, number 6 is to power for your climate. So that's basically switching to a renewable energy provider. And, you know, for lots of us, it's as simple as switching your bill, getting panels and batteries if you can, turning off the gas. So gas is not a transition fuel, it's a carbon bomb. You know, gas means CO2, it means fugitive emissions. You know, I think I hate this whole gas-led recovery thing. It's a bit dumb. Number 7 is...
Sorry, just back on that, Kate, for gas. In Victoria, I don't know if, it's still compulsory actually to put gas on to new residential.
Yeah, we have the same problem in new builds in South Australia, and there's certainly a movement by some of the local members to try and change that. And that's where, political advocacy is so important. This is something where, us as consumers should be going, hey, no way.
Well, they'll change that. That's just around the corner. In fact, I'm talking next week to the people. I talked to them yesterday about they've got a big development on. They've got gas on the first stage. I'm talking to them about next week about not putting gas on to the next stage.
Absolutely, absolutely. The next
Sorry,
thing...
just on gas too. I noticed there are advertising campaigns for green gas, natural gas. What is that?
It's
supposed to be?
It's a lie.
Yeah.
False news.
No.
I saw that too. Yeah.
Well, is it biogas or not?
Well, that's what I'm wondering.
Well,
because I know in Europe you can buy green gas, and that is biogas. Because because they got so much shit, so they can produce a lot of biogas. But we have a lot of concentration.
Yeah, no, I think it's just a greenwash.
Yeah, well, Jeff's got something. Jeff will tell you maybe it's not.
Yeah, a lot of it is greenwashing. So, and if you put it in perspective, the majority of it is. But there is green gas, and GV Community Energy is looking at the commercialisation of producing green gas through a biodigester. So it's about, there is scope for it, and there is green gas.
There you go. Okay.
Yep.
But we can then go down further, ultimately to hydrogen. So but you're right, Kate. It's bullshit, this whole thing about gas. It's a gas-led recovery. That's it.
Yeah, that's a different point to greenwashing of green gas.
That's right. Yeah.
Got to split them.
Yeah.
And I think the notion of the federal government, the previous federal government, I think it was irresponsible and misleading to be suggesting that we need a gas-led recovery. That to me is despicable. The difficulty of green gas is it gets caught up in that. And it could be argued that by having green gas, you're prolonging the green gas, or you're prolonging the gas sector. And we're particularly focused on programs of electrifying everything within the domestic sector, and even in the industrial sector. So we're involved in some of the preliminary transition, and it can be a two-edged sword and problematic to be promoting green gas, and we're dealing with that on that green wedge because we're interested in biodigesters and diverting waste from landfill and feeding microbes and producing methane gas for the generation of electricity or putting into the network. We are complicating that conversation. We acknowledge that.
And methane's a really potent greenhouse gas anyway, no matter where it comes from. So I have a problem. I worry about that. But I think, keeping messages simple is so important, and that's
I agree.
It's a wicked problem, isn't it? That concept of systems problems that require systems approaches means so much needs to be done from so many different facets. So number 7 is to transport for your climate. So basically that's using your feet to get about as much as you can. Public transport, obviously, I appreciate this is harder in a rural setting. Electric cars and bikes. Basically, every time we get in a car, we're at the end of this chain. And every way along the way, we're releasing greenhouse gases. And, that's a problem.
Just on that, Kate, this morning there's a gardening bloke comes on gardening on the ABC 774, and he's great with his plants, and he talks about his birds, and I've been thinking he's bloody fantastic. And then this morning he said, I've got this bit of a presentation I'm going to deliver in Margaret River, right, which is in West Australia. So he's going to fly over there
maybe
to deliver his. bloody
Zoom.
presentation.
Yeah.
Godfather, it was going so well. Just send them the presentation.
Oh, so none of us are perfect as well, right?
That's right.
Number 8 is financing for our planet. So, you know, that's the whole divestment movement. So that's taking your money out of banks and financial institutions that support the fossil fuel industry and putting it in ones that don't. Market Forces is a really good website to look at this. Yeah, basically we know that the big 4 banks continue to lend vast sums of money to the fossil fuel industry, and, you know, it's all about the power of your money. Number 9 is voting for your climate. So, you know, it's vital we have a political response to the climate crisis. We've just had the climate election where I think a lot of Australians have kind of taken this one on board. You know, obviously they haven't got the independence on this chart from Climate and Health Alliance, but, you know, our political representatives, we elect them to represent us, you know, so we're allowed to tell them what we think. I'm really into political action. My local member has met me a number of times now, poor bloke. But, you know, like, go and tell them, you know, why not? You know, what do we, you know, anyway. And then the last thing is...
Sorry, Kate, just one more. What should the Greens do right now?
Oh, no, isn't that a hot potato?
It is. Well, you know, it's a difficult one.
It's a very difficult one. I think I like what they're saying now about talking about the 43% as a floor, not a ceiling.
Yeah.
I think that's the best line, because, you know, I think we need to run on the board now.
Yeah.
You know, like, and yeah, 43% is not in keeping with the science. You know, like, you know, globally, the IPCC is saying 50% by 2030, and certainly the Climate Council and, you know, environmental groups within Australia are saying Australia should do some more heavy lifting, 75% by 2030. And, you know, there's groups that will show us how to do it. But if they block it and nothing happens, ouch, like that would be a massive step back. So, you know, I think they should make sure that there's a ratchet up mechanism in the legislation and then pass it. Yeah, I don't know. What do you guys think?
I agree with you. Yeah.
Yeah.
I
What
think,
do you think, Jeff? You
I
don't...
agree with what you said, and I think where we can get traction is accelerating the transition. So don't stall the discussion as to what the percentage is, just get there quicker.
Yeah.
And as we move along, and the scorecard said, you know what, that wasn't that painful.
Yes.
We've got more time, we can do more. So it's
So
shifting the focus to action, as you've said, and not getting stuck on the numbers. And as the scoreboard shifts, we then keep nudging. That's how I see it should play out, and I think that's how it will play out.
Yeah,
because
I hope so, Jeff.
The conversation of it's too costly for the transition is a conversation out of context, because the cost of inaction is far more expensive. So by demonstrating that the transition is actually cost effective, and, you know, the conversation that I've had with the people on the screen here on many occasions is the investments to date that people have made for no other reason than being economically sound. And moving forward, that will continue.
Yeah, and so it won't be so bad after all. That's the thing, isn't it? You know, like, let's start doing, and then people go, oh, well, no, I'm all right. I'm still going, you know, I can have a palmy at the pub. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's still, life goes on.
Yes.
You know, it's not like suddenly we don't have electricity anymore. You know, and I think that narrative of, oh, if we act on climate, we'll all be living in caves. You know, it's just, it's bullshit. Yeah.
Kate, can I ask when and why the climate crisis crossed your horizon?
Oh, yeah, sure. I've known about it for a long time. You know, like in the back of my mind, like so many people, it was there. And then when Tony Abbott became Prime Minister, I started to get active, because I really hated how he ripped the guts out of the CSIRO. I thought that was bad. And that was when I started to get braver and went, you know, hey, what am I doing? And then the 2018 report was the real galvanizing point for me. And when I read that, you know, the 1.5 report that was handed down in 2018, when I read that, I was like, okay, I'm alive on this planet. What am I doing? Yeah.
So what do you see with your patients?
I see some people who are not aware at all. But I do see lots of people with mental health concerns around climate.
When you say
and
mental health concerns, how does that manifest itself? What does that mean?
That means that people might come in saying with anxiety or depression, and then if I ask them, you know, are you worried about the planet? They say yes. And then we start talking about it from that point of view. So there's people with this existential dread, you know, that are just terrified and scared. So I see that a lot, and I often refer them to a thing called Activate, which comes from the Australian Psychological Society, which has got, you know, different things that people can do. I also see young people deciding not to have children. So I've had a few people coming in asking for contraception, and then when you have the conversation about, you know, why do you want to go on the pill or whatever, some people saying, well, I've decided not to have children.
Like our kids have said.
Oh, have they, Wendy? Yeah.
Hey.
Have your children said that, Wendy? Is that what
well, I would suffer anxiety and depression on occasion with climate grief myself, and then to add to that, my children have said, "What's the point of us having children? It's fucked."
Yeah, isn't that? And I think that's the most heartbreaking thing of all. I find that's overwhelming.
Yeah, and they're very clever children. And I say, well, you know, you need to have children. You've got they're climate aware, and one's a scientist, and I say, well, no, your children would contribute to to the solution, not the problem, and you can contribute to the solution. But yeah, so it's distressing, not only from us, like as Jeff said, which I agree with him, that you get hit with it every day. You're aware of, you know, our impacts and what's happening and people's ignorance of it, and not enough action. And then to be hit from the other side too with that as well, potentially with our children not having children. It just adds to it.
Wendy, I agree with the response that you've just shared to when you hear people say they don't want to have children. And I think that's a really important response. What I've noticed recently, I've got friends of my age who are saying, knowing what I know today, I wouldn't have children if I went back in time. And my response to them is the same as what you've just said.
Yeah, and that's mine too, because certainly, you know, my child is 14 and I will work every day for their future, you know, like I'm not going to sit back and watch, you know, put her under threat. So, you know, it's been very much a motivating force for me. You know, like I think if I was childless, I don't know, I think I'd be more disengaged. I don't think I'd be fighting quite as hard as I am. Yeah, Alfred.
When we were in our 20s, we decided not to have kids. We got two now that are close to 50. But we were going to adopt. We didn't. Something happened and we didn't. But,
I know what happened.
Bloody toilet seat.
Okay, there's a whole other story there.
I'm not quite sure what happened.
But, you know, I think that kind of conversation is a really important conversation to have with health professionals, because it's, you know, so, you know, I talk to young people about mental health, but, you know, like Wendy, I've met, you know, older people with the same thoughts that you're going through with their children, you know, and how hard that is to think that, you know, that the family's not going to go on. I find
it's also, Kate, then that you worry, even probably worse, is that then if my children are thinking about that, then they haven't got a very positive attitude towards the future, which would affect, you would imagine, would affect their own mental health. Yeah. So I'm hoping that things are going to change around for the better, the attitudes of the, you know, for the population in general.
Yeah, which is why we need leadership to give us hope.
That's right.
As part of my work, I spend a lot of time with elderly clients, And for me, there's two very clear camps. And one camp is it's too late to do anything. So I'm just going to get on with what I'm doing. There's no point trying to reduce my carbon footprint. It's just too late. So they don't invest in solar. They don't try to reduce their carbon footprint, essentially. The other camp is the other extreme, is I've got a small time left. My legacy is I want to look after my children, my children's children.
Yeah.
That's the legacy. And it is such an extreme and contrasting view. And I again, I would deal with that almost on a daily basis.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Yeah. It's
what's distress? I often will turn the news off because, and climate conversations off because I get tired of it. But because and particularly I'm interested in biodiversity, and with this new biodiversity statement, you will think, God, we've been telling people that, like all of us have been telling people that for years. We've been aware of it. We're always fighting for it, like we're still trying to stop destruction of habitat in Victoria, and it's because it's on and on and on and on. You don't get there's no resolve. There's no what do you call it?
End point.
There's no break point. There's no break from it. There's no end point, and there's still government denying it. Even in our states, whether the federals acknowledged it now, I can imagine that our state will still deny it because they're still allowing the destruction. And then that brings me back to, like, in our groups, sometimes I'm a land care member. Sometimes I think, what are we planting on Tree Day for? The destruction is higher than what we can ever replace these trees with. So it's just what do you call it?
Counterproductive.
It's counterproductive. Like we're growing more trees for more logging to come along, and or
illegal firewood.
We can't replace it quick enough to stop the destruction. And the people at the higher above, they can't even see that. Look at that's what gets me.
And I think going back to Kate's one of your earlier slides about doing something, to me is critical in this type of tipping point. So the work that Wendy's describing, whilst it's still back, it's making a difference. And what I see is it's slowing down the rate of decline. We're still declining, but you're slowing down the rate of decline, and that's important. That's part of the transition. What I'm interested in, Kate, is as a GP, what do you say to your clients when they come in and they do express depression related to understanding climate change? What's the conversation you have? I'm intrigued to hear that.
Before I answer that, Jeff, I just want to say about the concept of every 10th of a degree matters. So, we can feel like, what we do doesn't matter, but every 10th of a degree matters. So what we are doing is we're slowing the rate of change. And, so everything we do matters. And I think every time you do something, we need to acknowledge what we do and go, okay, I can't change what Putin does. I can only change what I do. And so I do that. But when it comes to the discussion, Jeff, the thing I just listen. Just listen, give people an opportunity to talk about this, because so many of us, we feel like we're alone so often, don't we? We feel like we're just, no one, we care, but no one else seems to care. So, just properly listening to people and hearing what they have to say. But the thing I love the most is the Activate framework from the Australian Psychological Society. So if you look at, I'll stop sharing. That's my last slide, and it's basically Act for Your Climate, and I think we're all doing that anyway. So, I think you can kind of get that point. And then I'll be able to get back into my computer and share it for you. Yeah, so what I try and do is just say, like, acknowledge their feelings and then say, okay, but be part of the solution, not part of the problem. Yeah.
I think on that point, and you mentioned the term yesterday, John Lang, who everyone on the screen knows, was about the Catchment Management Authority and this whole, and they've got a resilience strategy. It's all through resilience, right? And you mentioned the word there before. But the concentration's been on the resilience of people, not on the resilience of the environment, right? And that's, and people don't match this up. Without the environment, there will be no resilience in humans, So there's a big gap there. And even the CMA, who are responsible for that sort of, that's what they're put on earth for, if you like. There is this big gap. It's all about people. I think we're just too bloody selfish. We want to be resilient. We want to be prosperous. We want to be able to travel. We want all this and that. We still want to be Superman, that we won't get bowled over. But no, not enough emphasis on the natural resource.
This is where leadership again comes in. Like the first thing, one of those things earlier I say about, it's this immense global problem and it requires the action of governments, financially, all the institutions, all the professional groups, and all the individuals. Like all of us we need to be all in. And we won't be all in if we don't get leadership on it. Yeah.
Your damning statistic about the Amazon, it's shocking, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It's awful.
We've been talking for well over an hour. So should we go on, or does Kate need to get going? Or
I am starting to. I do need to do a few other things today, but it's really great to talk to a group of people who are obviously so on top of this. That you're all very passionate and well informed and can see the problems that are going on around you, and like, good on you. Yeah, and I hope that you do acknowledge the work that you do, because I can see how that it is distressing, and to show yourself some self-care in that way. But like, if when you go to your GP next, the next time you see any health professional, please ask the question, because certainly as the chair of the RACGP's climate group, I'm really trying to activate doctors to be climate aware, and because we need to be.
Get them all on hybrids for a start, on electric cars rather than the BMWs and all that sort of stuff. That'd be a good start.
Well, if you can afford 50K for a car.
Kate, apologies. I just had to step out and I came back and all I heard was, make sure you ask that question to your GP.
I'll just ask them what they think about it.
What was
the question I referred to earlier, Jeff? So just basically, what do they know about climate change and human health? Yeah. All right. Well, look, thank you very much. I think
Kate, thank you very much. It's been great to have you come along. I'm disappointed there's not more people here. So
that's okay.
It's another struggle, isn't it?
Yeah, it is another struggle. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, but I'm always up for a chat. And so, like, if there's ever, if it sounds like you do a few events and things, so if there's ever an event that you want to speak at and I can zoom in, more than happy to do it.
That'd be great, Kate. Appreciate that. Thank you very much.
All right, really nice to meet you all.
Well done.
Thank
you.
you.
Done. See you later. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
She's gone.